Hello, my name is Andrea Mcbeth. I'm a naturopath in Portland, Oregon, and I'm excited to share some information about the gut microbiome and do a brief overview on what are pre, pro, and postbiotics and how does that relate to human health. I am a practitioner in Portland. I teach at the National University of Natural Medicine, doing nutrition and the microbiome sometimes as a guest lecturer. And then I also work with a postbiotic company here in Portland called Dana. So hopefully you can keep that in context of my information, both as a um, caveat for my bias and credentials for why you should care what I have to say. But I'm excited to talk about this topic and I care very much about it. So I like to think about the microbiome as an organ system that we've only recently discovered. And prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics are relevant is because that's how these microbes and organ system are communicating with the rest of our body and impacting human health. It's also how we impact the health of that ecosystem and then um, by relation impact our overall human health by what we eat, drink, and think and modulate that sometimes 3-pound organ of trillions of microbes, bacteria and viruses, fungi living in our GI tract. So I'll start with the definitions from the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics so that we have a place to start, even though I don't love all these definitions. I think it's a good groundwork. Prebiotics are defined as substrates that are selectively utilized by host microorganisms, conferring a health benefit. So this is the food that we eat that feeds our microbes, the fiber, the polyphenols, the nutrients we give it. It turns out prebiotics are really important. We haven't been looking at them as long as probiotics, but when we do look at research shifting prebiotics and the kind of fiber that people are given, it does impact human health and does modulate the way that the microbes are interfacing with the rest of us. I think some of the most interesting spaces are in colorectal cancer, neuro and psychological conditions, GI conditions like IBS and IBD, metabolic disease, including obesity and diabetes, and then some other interesting work being done in osteoporosis and different immune modulatory things. Overall, prebiotics are changing the metabolism of the microbes, and then those microbes' metabolism is changing how we are interacting with them. And so I think about them as the start of the foundation of how we modulate our microbiome for human health. Um, Probiotics, which many of you have heard of, are the live microorganisms. So the bacteria themselves, which are, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit. This definition is particularly aimed towards the differentiating supplements from food, but I like to think of probiotics as all the live organisms, whether it's from sauerkraut or a supplement. They are the commensals that live in us and are so important to human health that we've spent years researching. I think the only thing I want to say about probiotics in particular is that as we are learning more the traditional paradigm of whether or not probiotics need to be alive and that their mechanism is engrafting and living in us and replacing turns out to be challenged, whether it turns out that the probiotics don't need to be alive because they're just passing through and stimulating, or components of their metabolism are what's the impact, I think will be yet to be seen. But in particular, this work done in Akkermansia, mucinophilia, showing that when pasteurized, they actually had more benefit on these metabolic parameters that Akkermansia is so famous for, really challenged our whole concept of what it is that probiotics are doing and the norms around that. The most interesting, I think, of these three is postbiotics, because that's what I work with and think about the most. And postbiotics, coming after pro, are the preparation of inanimate microorganisms and or their components that confers a benefit to the host. I think of postbiotics as the metabolites or molecules that bacteria or the probiotics make when they consume a prebiotic. And that is their language of communication, what they're using to speak to the rest of the cells in our human body and each other. And this is just one of many classifications, but the general idea being our fiber gets broken down into things like vitamins, short chain fatty acids like butyrate and acetate and propionate, bacteriocins, so molecules that modulate the ecosystem itself and each other, the microbes to outcompete, organic acids, peptides, all kinds of stuff like that. What we're finding is that this, again, is the group of molecules that can pass that mucosal barrier. If you imagine the microbes sitting on the mucus layer and then our human cells, they're interacting both locally in the microbes and on those first layer of epithelial cells and systemically. So we'll get into a little bit of that, but they're impacting the epithelial barrier function, mucus production, GI tract. They're the molecules that are binding these cells and kicking off this cascade, in addition to cross-feeding each other, cross-competing with each other, and more interesting work being done looking at redox. I want to end by touching on the systemic effects, especially things that are relevant to pain. Immune education turns out to be really important, metabolic impacts, nervous system, both via the vagus nerve and the neuropod cells, are all being stimulated by the small molecules that the bacteria are making, or the postbiotics. And I want to end with contextualizing this when in a piece of work that was done in visceral sensitivity in IBS, where you're looking at abdominal pain. And it turns out that a type of these enteroendocrine cells, or neuropod cells, have a specific receptor that when it's downregulated, drugs like linaclotide, which is used for constipation, don't work. And what we see here is a summary of all these different postbiotics that are changing up and down regulating the receptors that are present on cells, making that leap to connecting how these postbiotics may impact. Although these are two separate research papers, I just think it's a nice way to bring it all together and say we're at the tip of the iceberg of learning what these molecules are doing and how the microbiome is impacting health. And I think there's a lot more information to come. Thank you so much.